Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Seahawks fans, welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, here with Keith Myers, talking Seahawks football. This show is our midweek show. Last time you saw us come in here and talk about the regular season predictions. We had a great time with that show. This week, this show, we're talking about what we expect as far as player and team, stat leaders, award winners, that sort of thing. And so we'll have a little bit of fun just kind of weaving back and forth, talking about players, talking about the season, what we expect, all that stuff. But first, Keith, welcome in.
Yeah. It's, God, we were so close to a first game. It's hard to believe that we made it through such a long and weird off season, but here we are.
Our next show is literally a preview of the game. So we're getting very, very close. But this show is kind of going to be just a fun show. Just making up some different things, some categories that we just want to talk about and highlight. And so let's just start right in, shall we?
Yeah, let's do it. All right.
So I'll just start right at the top. Offensive player of the year and defensive player of the year. Or do you want to finish up there? But I thought this would be kind of a good way to open it because to me, the choices seem obvious, and I really tried to work hard to make sure that these weren't my choices. But I just couldn't get away from them, and they just kept coming back.
How do you have an offensive player of the year in Seattle and not have it be Russell Wilson?
Yeah, I know, and I really tried to make it DK Metcalf, and I do believe that he's poised to have one of the best receiving seasons in franchise history. So, and how do you not include a player like that in a conversation with offensive player of the year, and you still end up going with Russell Wilson?
Yeah, because in order for DK Metcalf to have such a monster year, Russell Wilson has to have a monster year. So you end up the only way that if Metcalf has a monster year and Wilson throws a million picks along the way and trying to get Metcalf the ball that time.
And literally throws us out of the playoffs or throws us out of contention. Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't see that happening. I just don't see that as a possibility.
So we both have Russell Wilson as the offensive player of the year. I like I said, I tried to go away from that, but the more I looked into it, the more I settled in on Wilson, the new offensive scheme pairing with Shane Waldron. And just, I think, he's always been a really efficient quarterback. But I think that takes the next level here where the team really has made a dedicated effort to kind of improve upon their third down conversion rates and so forth. And their ability to execute in the red zone has always been stellar, but they've got a couple of new weapons to be able to help with that this year. And then the offensive line seems to be solidified. So for me, everything is lining up for Russell Wilson to have a career year.
Yeah. And I would agree with that. I think you, they're changing their philosophy away from, we're going to do things and then ask Russell Wilson to bail us out because they're likely to fail, to we're going to play to Russell's strengths and let him be a catalyst rather than a savior. And he's going to have just a fantastic year.
Yeah.
He's got to.
So on the defensive side of the ball, I really tried to give this to Bobby Wagner, because I think Bobby Wagner just has earned it year in, year out. He's just the guy. He's been the guy.
He's just the guy.
The guy.
One of the greatest to ever, put on a helmet.
But I went in a different direction though this year.
6-time All-Pro, 7-time Pro Bowler. It's hard to go away from him. Where'd you go?
Leading tackler, forever.
Yeah. Yeah, he's led the NFL in tackles, I think 4 different years.
I went with Jamal Adams. And the reason I did is that he's not a distraction. He's got his contract. He's going to be better utilized this year in a more neutral role where they're not pressing him to rush the quarterback all the time. He's going to be able to kind of fit into a scheme better. Players are going to be able to rely on him better, specifically Diggs, to be able to be in positions that he knows where he's going to be all the time. And I think that really gives Jamal Adams actually more freedom in this defense to be able to be athletic. I think last year he was a little hamstrung a little bit in a not pigeonholed into that one role where he was very effective in rushing the passer, but I thought he was less effective in other areas that the defense probably could have used him. Second half of the year, it wasn't so prominent, and he was able to do that. Now this year, with a full year kind of under his belt in the scheme, and then this year his role is a little bit more defined, I think that he has a real opportunity to be the new face of the defense.
Yeah, kind of take over that mantle from Wagner, who's aging a little bit. No, I didn't go with Jamal Adams as my defensive player of the year, simply because I'm concerned that he's going to miss a few games because of, injury here or there. He's coming off surgery on his shoulders.
Just from the way he plays.
Just from the way he plays, because he hits so hard. He's so physical. It wears, he's not going to play 17 games.
It's certainly a legitimate concern.
And so I think that you're going to see other people have opportunities. So then I started looking and I'm like, okay, how do I not give it to Bobby Wagner? Because I thought for sure you're going to say Wagner, and that's boring for it to be Russell Wilson and Bobby Wagner. And so I was looking, okay, who else would it be if it's not going to be Adams? And I'm like, okay, it's got to be one of the pass rushers, right? So Carlos Dunlap's name just sits there as a guy who probably will get 7 or 8 sacks over the course of the year, which isn't spectacular. But what it is he's the guy who sets everyone else up. And so you might see, Darrell Taylor gets 6 or 7, and Alton Robinson gets 6, and Kerry Hyder gets 7. And you're going to have this whole group of people that are kind of grouped in that 6 or 7 sack range. Dunlap's going to have one more than them in this theory, but he's also the catalyst because he draws double teams on every play. He makes life easier for everyone else.
But when you're a sports writer, and you're looking at those nuances, that sometimes we have a real opportunity and kind of understand those things. Sometimes beat writers are all about the production and the flashiness and so forth.
You got to get the clicks, and so you got to have the stats. And ultimately, when I looked at that and I went through this whole thought process that I was telling you, I'm like, what it's going to be is Dunlap's going to be massively important to the success of this defense, and everyone's going to know it who plays on the Seahawks or that really, really studies that stuff.
Right.
But everyone's going to look at the fact that Bobby Wagner has 130 tackles and is in the top 3 in the NFL and go, he's the guy. And ultimately, I came back to the boring answer of Bobby Wagner.
Wow.
The 6-time All-Pro will probably get his 7th All-Pro this year. And if a guy gets an All-Pro, how do you say it's not him?
Yeah, right. Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned a lot of contenders there too about flashiness. And if one catches fire and just happens to double-digit sack and so forth, you might turn your attention in a different direction just by the nature of just the flashiness. And maybe that player directly impacts a game or two because of that. So you might, that might emerge as kind of a dark horse later in the year, but we'll see. So let's start with the offense just as a general category. And I thought total offensive rankings would be kind of a good category to kind of project and see because of the new scheme. Like, how is this thing really going to work? Are we justified in thinking this is a top 5 offense? And I came away thinking, yeah, we probably are. I think I had us coming in the end as 4th overall in yards and points and 8th in rushing, which was good enough to be 4th overall. And I just think that
rushing.
Yeah. Well, no, eighth in rushing.
Oh, 8th in rushing.
8th in rushing, 3rd in passing, 4th overall.
Yeah. No, I think the passing and overall I think points is up there because I think this team's going to be really efficient at turning red zone trips into touchdowns and not settling for field goals.
Yeah.
But I have their rushing totals down.
I have them up. I have them up just because I think of Health and Penny actually having a decent year.
I had them down around 12th just because I just see them being a more pass-friendly team. They're going to get their yards there. I think they're going to...
So you're going to go against the perception that Pete Carroll has set up in the offseason, which is wrong. It is wrong. I mean, the perception is that the Seahawks want to run the ball more, etc. Right. So
Pete Carroll hasn't set up anything. There's been a Twitter narrative that some beat writers have picked up on.
It started out in a media sort of narrative, and of course, a national media narrative, which doesn't understand, again, the nuances of the team and what's actually being said.
He wants to run the ball more, but not run the ball more often. He wants to be better on 3rd down, so there's more opportunities to run and pass because you're simply running more offensive plays.
Yes.
So yes, he wants to run the ball more, but
the key word is efficiency. They want to create a more efficient offense, even though it's a very efficient offense already. I think they want to be the most efficient offense in the NFL.
See, in the past, they've had 2 different things that they did. They either ran the ball or they threw it deep, and there was nothing else. And this year, what they're doing is they're adding that short and mid-range passing game, the timing stuff, the rhythm stuff that gets the ball out of Russell Wilson's hands faster and to his playmakers. And by doing that, they are going to generate that more. Pete Carroll talked about wanting to run the ball more because he wanted at the very end of the season because he wanted to open things up for the passing game and get teams committed to stopping the run and have more opportunities. But you can create those opportunities by doing different things in the passing game as well. So when they're throwing, more slants and more crossing patterns and things that are more efficient, that's going to open stuff up in the same way. It's also going to open up running lanes so that Chris Carson can just go to town. And
so you're totally in favor of like the Shane Waldron approach of this entire thing.
Yeah.
Like the Rams offense with Russell Wilson running it is pretty darn hyper efficient.
Yeah. Because the Rams offense with Jared Goff running it was surprisingly efficient. And now you're going to give that offense the talent of Russell Wilson at the helm and the talent of DK Metcalf taking the top off of it.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
right. That sky's the limit.
Where's the drawback here?
So let's go over a few individual performance guys on the offense and kind of find out where you're thinking they'll be at the end of the year as far as production. How does this all work? So I'll start with Russell Wilson. I think that he's going to slightly uptick on almost all of his categories, except for 4,600 yards total. And a lot of that is increased because of yards after catch opportunities. 38 touchdowns, so he drops a little bit there, but I'll share why in just a minute. And then a 108 passer rating. He was at 105 last year. I have that increasing a little bit just because of the efficiency increases.
How many picks do you have him throwing?
I didn't do that. Oh, I didn't look at that. But what did he have last year? Like 13, 12? 13.
He had 13.
And so I would probably give that. He's going to have more opportunities this year, but it's going to be a safer throws overall because he was throwing into a lot of situations last year. This year, I think he's throwing into a lot of more open situations because of the timing and getting the ball out a little bit quicker. So I actually see his interceptions either staying the same with more pass attempts or decreasing overall as a percentage.
Yeah, see, I've actually got his passing yards upticking. You have him at 46. I had him at 48. I didn't think he got to 5,000, but a lot of that is coming from yards after the catch. Like I think his completion percentage should be about the same. I mean, it was at 68.8 last year, which is pretty dang high.
I think he could get right at 70, which he's really been a goal of his for like 4 or 5 years.
I know. And he keeps, it's gone from, 65 to 66 to 68. He could get there, especially if he's being asked to do efficient things and not throw the ball deep all the time. I thought his touchdowns would go up and not down. So instead of 40, which he had last year, I have him, at 42, which I know is not a huge uptick, but I just think that it does go up. And his interceptions, because he's not being asked to throw into double coverage all the time, I think it drops from 13 down to 10.
Yeah. Well, I'll talk a little bit about why I thought the touchdowns would go down for him just a hair, because I think that the increased efficiency is going to get them in the red zone more often. But that also means that our running backs are going to have more opportunities to take the ball into the end zone. And so those TDs dropping slightly on Russell Wilson end up going back into our running backs. So I have Chris Carson coming in at 14 touchdowns and Rashad Penny having 7 touchdowns. Of course, some of the others are spread out with other players that I didn't really write down. But I think that's the shift that we might see, where we get to the 2-3 yard line and there's just more opportunities for the running backs to get those TDs. As far as the receivers go overall, let's talk about those guys and kind of where you're at. I had like Metcalf and Lockett virtually the same, although I did uptick yardage wise for Metcalf to 1,400 yards overall, but had 12 touchdowns. He impacts the game more this year than he ever has, and he impacts the game a lot. So to give him just a little bit more there, it could even end up being more than that. But it's going to be significant.
Yeah, so I was looking at all of stats and stuff historically, and looking at Lockett. Lockett had 100 receptions last year, 132 targets. He went over 1,000 yards, 10 touchdowns, and I go, God, that is a really productive guy that just does all the things, and I'm so glad that he's back with Seattle for another few years. And I thought of that. I'm like, who's going to be the biggest beneficiary of stats of this new offense with the stuff over the middle and the shorter stuff? And honestly, I think it's going to be Lockett. Yeah. And so I've got Lockett jumping up to like 120 receptions, 1,200 yards.
Oh my goodness.
And 12 touchdowns, because he's going to get more receptions.
I didn't do that.
Because I just think he's going to be the guy.
I see what you're saying, though. Totally. I see what you're saying. But if there wasn't another player that I think might have an impact on those stats, I would agree with you. But I gave some of those things to Eskridge.
Okay.
So
and
I had Lockett as 1,000 yards, and I had Lockett at 8 touchdowns. So I had him staying the same yardage wise, because I do think his opportunities might increase. And his touchdowns go down just slightly more, just from the reason I gave to the running backs, but also because of Eskridge. I had Eskridge coming in at 600 yards and 6 touchdowns, and some of those touchdowns are being taken away from Lockett. I also have Gerald Everett impacting the receiving touchdowns and yardage as well. So I have Everett coming in at 500 yards and 6 touchdowns, and another player that is going to be specifically used for red zone stuff almost exclusively in Parkinson at 400 yards and 7 touchdowns. So for me, I just looked at it as being more of a shared offense this year, as opposed to everything's just being forced into Lockett and Metcalf. I think we have more weapons now to spread that out a little bit.
So here my counterpoint to that, and the reason why I thought Lockett was going to be the beneficiary, is the guy that's missing from all of the stuff that we talked about is David Moore, who's moved on to Carolina.
Well, he got cut too.
I did not realize he got cut.
Yeah, he got cut. He's out there right now.
He had 417 yards and 6 touchdowns last year. And so the Seahawks went to him quite a bit. He had, he had a big part in the offense, especially in the red zone. And so those touchdowns have to go to somewhere, right? Those are the ones that I expect Eskridge to pick up. And that leaves additional yards and TDs and everything to go to other players. And so I just
what do you think about the increased use in the tight end group?
No, that is I do expect that to happen. I mean, they used the tight ends a lot last year. They didn't get the ball to them. Disley was forced to be a guy who was a blocker all the time. And, they just didn't get much out of the other guys either. And it turned out where the three of them together turned out to have the stats of one good tight end.
Yeah, they had 75 receptions overall as a group last year.
Which is...
And this year, I would expect that to go up over 100.
Between the three of them?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. That's a lot of receptions to the tight end.
So I think Everett's going to come in at like 45 receptions. I think Disley's probably 35 and Parkinson 35.
Yeah, I don't think Parkinson's going to get that many, just because I don't think they're going to have three tight ends on the field as much. But I expect Everett to get a bunch. I expect basically what I was going to say is Everett's going to pick up 2 of the 3 in terms of stats from last year, 2/3 of it. 2 of the 3 guys. Disley's going to uptick a little bit. Parkinson's going to get some opportunities, but I'm not sure he's going to be a huge impact outside of red zone stuff.
So what do you think about the running back situation?
Well, the running back situation is interesting because I think that you're going to see them be better. Like the yards per carry is going to be up. Their usage is going to be down, but they're going to be more productive on a per carry basis. And so with that, it's really hard.
Why do you think that their usage is going to be down when you said if they convert more on third down and so forth, they're going to have more opportunities overall?
Because I think that it's not going to be a one guy thing. I mean, last year there were some injuries, stuff got moved around, a lot of different people got runs, but when it came down to it, if Carson was healthy, it was the Carson show. And when he wasn't, then that's when they ran into Carlos Hyde and other guys. But this year, I think that you're going to see Carson splitting time with Penny and Dallas and Collins. I think overall you're going to see a lot of mix and matching at the running back position. So I don't know if any one guy is going to just explode. Carson only had 681 yards last year.
Well, you have to admit it was frustrating to watch how they use Carson. Now I get it, but they really restricted him. He could never really get into a rhythm. He never really, had, there were 1 or 2 games where he had enough carries where he just really got into it and he was dictating terms to a defense at the end of games. Mm-hmm. I think there's more of that this year. And the reason for that is because I think the team trusts its depth better this year. So you've got Penny and then you've got Collins as well. Each can carry a load if they needed to. And I think that gives them a little bit more freedom to be able to actually push Carson a little bit, give him the carries early in games, knowing that him to kind of get into it.
If he gets hurt, you can still run with Collins and Penny.
Exactly. Yeah. So I do expect Carson to reach 1,000 yards this year.
So I was looking at that. I'm like, with that same thing, does that mean that they lean on Carson because they know they can, or does that mean they're like, hey, we've got these other 2 talented backs that we can hand the ball to, and they'll be productive as well. So
and they've earned touches in practice and so forth.
And we don't have to run Carson into the ground in the running game.
And we save him for the playoffs or whatever.
Yeah, and so
you could see it both ways. I don't like the holding back of a player like that. Use your weapons.
Yeah. At the same time, though, he's so injury prone. If you don't hold him back, are you better off having part of him, or are you better off having all of him now and none of him? I think
you're better off having all of him as the weeks go on. And if he gets injured for 2 or 3 weeks, you've got some really good options. But I think you need to be able to use him. I think the whole restriction thing proved last year that it really didn't work. Like, it just wasn't effective to hold a player like that back. And maybe it was just because we just didn't have a lot of options behind Carson. Like, Carlos Hyde got hurt as well, and so we were just kind of a bad spot overall. But
yeah,
now that we've got him, it seems like we're fully loaded, including Dallas there. And all of these guys can really receive the ball out of the backfield really well. So you could be right. Like, running back by committee approach this year might be the ticket.
If you were to look at it, if they're going to throw the ball more, they need guys that are good in blitz pickup and that kind of stuff. And you also need guys that can catch the ball out of the backfield. And who's the best on this team at those two things?
Chris Carson.
Chris
Carson. I expect to have Chris Carson have 45 receptions out of the backfield this year for almost 500 yards and an additional 4 touchdowns. So that's what I wrote down.
He had the last 2 years. So 2 years ago, when they played him all the time, they really ran him. He had 1,200 yards,
right?
He had 37 receptions on 47 targets.
Yes.
And last year, when they metered him and they barely, they didn't play him as much and he missed more games because of injury and all of that, he had 37 receptions on 46 targets.
Yes. And now what do you expect out of him with a Shane Waldron offense that specifically tries to work his running backs into games like that?
Honestly, I would say, how about we go say 37 receptions on 45 targets and we just continue the trend? Because I think that if you are to look at who is going to be the best receiver out of the backfield, it's going to be a guy like DJ Dallas, not Chris Carson, because
I think Chris Carson's underrated that way.
He is underrated at it, but he's not as good at, you saw it in the preseason and training camp. Dallas is explosive.
Well, and you've got to be able to use your weapons, and you can't just have a guy like Dallas sitting on the sidelines. You've got to be able to use him. And I think you're right. Running back by committee to a certain extent, especially with the reception part of it, is going to be key to giving Carson a chance to rest a little bit.
And if you look at what the Rams did when Waldron was there, they had a 3-headed monster at tailback, and all 3 of the guys got playing time and their carries. Now, at the end of the year, they leaned more on Cam Akers because he was the most talented of the 3. But for most of the year, it was pretty even across all 3 of the guys. I could see them attacking this similarly because you've got 4 guys really, because you have to include Collins. But of the top 3, if you go with Dallas and Penny and Carson, they have different skill sets. Carson's your grinder up the middle. Penny's got your outside speed to mix with power on the outside zone. And Dallas is shifty and great pass catcher out of the backfield. So you've got 3 guys with different skill sets. I think that you go ahead and take advantage of their skills and not just try and force it all to one guy.
So out of everybody we mentioned, how many of those guys make the Pro Bowl this year on the offensive side of the ball? If you've got a top 4 or 5 offense total, you'd think you'd have, 4 or 5 players possibly going to the Pro Bowl from the offense.
I would say you're looking at 5 players to the Pro Bowl. Wilson, Metcalf, Lockett, Dwayne Brown, and then one of the tight ends. If Gerald Everett's the guy who gets all the catches, I would go with him.
Wow. Interesting. Very interesting. So I'm thinking maybe Lewis as well. Okay. So let's,
that's a really, really solid point. Because
he was in the rookie class. Like, he made the all rookie team. Defensive leaders. So quickly, we can run through these quickly. We spent a lot of time on the offense, but just because it's kind of fun to talk about. Let's talk about the defense and how the defense will impact this roster, this team this year, and wins. So total defensive rank. So this is interesting because of how the defense finished last year. And then we added some key pieces, I think, in the offseason, which makes it really pretty interesting to see. But I had them overall ranked 11th.
Okay.
And yards allowed 15th because of their back end, like, question marks. And then rushing defense, I had them finishing in the top 10 at 7th overall, and passing defense at 18th.
So you have them down as a passing defense.
Yeah. I just don't see much improvement there this year.
Yeah, it's hard. This is really hard to do because the pass rush is going to be better. The talent up front is both better and it's significantly deeper. But the back end, especially at cornerback, is such a mess at the moment that I have a hard time coming up with expectations.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they could really surprise us, which would be awesome. But the way it stands now, I see them being middling. And 11th is kind of where you're getting into the middling part of the NFL. Yeah. And I wish I was wrong.
If they're a top 15 defense, which you have them at 11th, then I think that's fair. I think I put them at 10th, but that was more of a, it's about there. But it's right there in the boundary between the top third and the middle third. That if they're as good on offense as we have every reason to suspect they will be, being a top 15 defense means that this is a good team that's going to win a lot of games.
Yes.
And
and I'll need to point out as well, I think that they're going to be a top 5 rushing defense, like against the run. I said they were 7th, about 5 to 7th, and they're going to impact rushing the passer. So I think that they're probably a top 5 rushing the passer team, but they're so bad on the back end that they end up being in the middle. And so that was my thing. Now I could be completely wrong. And there's some opportunities for that, for the defensive backfield in general to surpass my expectations. But like you said, it's really hard to have expectations when it's so unsettled. You don't even really know who your starters are going to be past like week 4. Sidney Jones might come in. He's probably going to need a couple weeks, but he might come in and really flash in practice, and they might throw him out there, and he might be a starter. DJ Reed, we worried about health. You never know. Bless Austin was expected to start for the Jets this year and has started 16 games in the last couple of years for them. And it'd be nice to throw a guy like that out there once in a while just to see what we've got. Is Flowers really improved, or is he just a guy that we have? And he got the job by default in essence. And Akella Witherspoon never really pressed him on that. So we just don't know these things until we actually see it on the field. But just on paper, I have my doubts. I'm totally excited about the front end of this defense. The defensive tackles, defensive ends, linebackers, and safety group are really solid, which puts this defense squarely in a top 10 conversation. But it's that back end that I have question marks on.
So I gave you a little bit of a, that's weird for you had their pass defense that low. But yeah, I agree. I think their run defense is top 5, and their pass defense is lower. I had them at 20th. And I thought you were going to give me a lot of crud about that, but then it turns out you have them down too. But for me, it's less about the cornerback talent. I mean, that is an issue right now, but it's more about the offense, because I can see the Seahawks putting up points,
keeping their defense off the field.
Yeah, and so if the Seahawks are putting up points, teams are going to come out throwing. They know, hey, if we want a shot in this game, we got to put up 30 points, and they're going to be throwing the ball downfield, and they're going to be giving up. They're going to be attacking, trying to keep up with Seattle's offense,
well,
and that means you're going to give up a lot of yards. You're just
well, you know what else you're going to give up though. Well, you know what else.
You give up yards, but you get interceptions.
Yeah, but you're going to get turnovers, and so that's exactly what I wrote down. So I wrote down sacks. Kerry Hyder 9, Dunlap 9, Adams 8, Taylor 8, Robinson 7. Like literally, we're going to be a sack-oriented type team.
So this is going to be the best pass rushing team in terms of sacks since 1983.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason for that is exactly what you said. Teams are going to start pressing. They're going to be throwing a lot. We're going to have a lot of opportunity for sacks. A. B, that pressure is going to create a lot of turnover opportunities. And so I have interception leaders. Marquise Blair leads the team in interceptions with 6. I have DJ Reed at 4, Diggs at 4, Sidney Jones at 3, and a few other guys at 2 and 1.
Now, see, you missed the guy who's going to lead the team in interceptions.
Yeah.
Quandre Diggs.
Well, I had Diggs at 4, but I have Blair just really kind of stepping out this year.
Always go with the free safety when you have teams that have to throw it deep.
That's why I put Blair in there, because I figured he's going to be kind of a hybrid defender for this team.
Yeah,
and he's going to work into a lot of situations.
He's going to be everywhere.
He's a turnover guy. Yeah, he's a ball hawk.
I just think that you're going to see Diggs in the back end just feasting.
He's going to benefit them. He's going to benefit the most
on ducks that get thrown up in the air, and he gets
tips and all that stuff.
He gets to slide over from his free safety spot and just.
I can see that.
Pick up all these things that are just floating up there for him.
See that's what makes this defense interesting, because I put him in at 11th overall, giving up some yards, being a fairly decent rush defense, and really kind of giving up a lot of yardage in the pass defense. But that pass rush is going to be so tantalizing and so effective. I think that it's going to start to really make this defense a turnover machine.
Mm-hmm.
And that is going to be the key to really winning a lot of games. And I think even with that top 10 defense, you pair that with that top 5 offense, I think you could start to do some damage depending on the way the ball bounces this year.
See, one of the things the NFL and NFL media rank defenses based on yards. And yards are so misleading for defenses, because giving up a ton of yards doesn't mean anything if you're not giving up a ton of points. If you are forcing field goals or getting turnovers, then those yards are meaningless.
That's why I had them at points allowed ranking 9th.
Yeah, and so I think that this defense is going to give up yards. Pete Carroll defenses tend to give up yards, but what they don't give up are points, because they either get turnovers or they, get stops and force field goals, or get them stopped just outside of field goal range, and force punts that, it backs the Seahawks offense up, but they still got that stop after giving up a bunch of yards, or they give up a bunch of yards and then they get a couple of sacks and push them back.
It's frustrating to watch as a fan, because it's not as consistent as you want to be, but you have more opportunity for splash plays, which is fun to watch. So it's kind of, it's a blend.
Yeah. And so, and I honestly think that's what this defense is going to be, is it's going to be frustrating. They're going to give up yards. Their teams are going to move the ball, but can they get the ball into the end zone? And I don't know.
Or can they come up with a play when they need to come up with a play? Just like Carlos Dunlap comes up with plays at the end of games, and and Jamal Adams comes up with plays. I think you can add a guy like Marquise Blair to that equation now. Quandre Diggs is the guy that puts himself in a position. And I honestly, think Daryl Taylor
and Robinson, those two guys.
And we haven't even talked about Brooks. So you add that speed in there, and it just kind of all works together better. Now it could blow it. This defense has an opportunity actually to blow my expectations out of the water on the pass defense. And if that happens, like if their pass defense ends up being better just because they are a turnover ball hawking machine, this defense could actually be top 10, top 7, I think. If it all works together.
If the cornerback situation, which is currently as messy as it could possibly be, solidifies into something decent, like if Flowers really does take that
they
step,
acquire a guy like Sherman or a guy like Stephon Gilmore.
Yeah, I mean this has the potential to be a great defense, but as it stands right now, I think it's going to be a good defense because it's got a glaring weakness.
So if you're GM John Snyder and you know everything that we've just talked about, and in our previous show we talked about the predictions and that we're way over a 10-win team. We're somewhere between 11 and 13 wins. You do whatever it takes to make a trade before the trade deadline to acquire a player to impact this defense.
Yeah, and the thing is that you look at what the Rams did when they acquired Ramsey, and they were able to bring him in, and he made a massive impact on that defense by giving them an elite player on the outside, similar to what the Seahawks had when they had Sherman out there, where you have that guy that just dictates to the opposing team's offensive coordinator, you can't do everything you want to do because we've got this guy. If you have a chance to go get a player who can impact a game like that, you have to. You have to go get him. You have to go do it. And you give up what you give up to get him.
So anything else that you have written down in your notes that you wanted to cover, or have we pretty much laid it all out there?
You had the sack leader as Dunlap with...
I had Hyder and Dunlap at 9 each.
See, I don't have Hyder getting that many. I have Hyder down at like 7, 6, because he's more of a cleanup guy, and I see Taylor Robinson and Dunlap eating so well.
They can just get there on their own. They're
going to get there on their own before Hyder has a chance to get in and clean up. And so I have him actually getting less. I originally really wanted to put Robinson as the sack leader. He did not get. He had 4.5 sacks last year on very limited opportunities.
20% of the defensive snaps.
Yeah, the guy is a natural pass rusher on that Leo side, getting around the corner, plays with speed and power, and that first step gets tackles. It gives them nuts. Like they just cannot move quick enough because he's so quick off the ball. But I don't think he's going to. I think he's going to be playing behind Dunlap, and Dunlap's going to get more of the stuff. So I had,
you know who we didn't mention at all? We didn't mention any defensive tackle in this equation.
Yeah, it's because our defensive tackles, for the most part, are run stuffers.
You think, though, that because of so much of this outside pressure generated by 4 or 5 guys, including Adams on the blitz, and maybe even Brooke, you throw Brooks into that equation this year because maybe they blitzed Brooks and Blair. So who could take advantage on the inside?
Is the guy that's most likely to, because Monet and
Woods,
there you go, they're not the type of guys that are going to generate a ton of push. They're run stuffers. They eat blocks. They are impossible to move. That's what they do. Whereas Poona Ford can get upfield and be disruptive and that kind of stuff. So Poona Ford's going to eat a little bit. And then it's also going to be whoever is the guy that is the 3 tech in passing situations, whether that is Collier or Rasheem Green, or maybe they move Hyder inside, or maybe Robert Kimdichie comes up off the practice squad.
Yeah, or even they're still thinking about bringing in the guy that they talked to, Geno Adkins.
Oh man, Adkins is a guy that just is natural. I mean, he's older now, so maybe
that's such a cheap way to really impact your defense. Seattle should be all over that signing right now. Yeah, because you can do that for like $3.5 million. Go get it.
Who do you cut? Who do you lose?
Who do you lose? Let's look at let's count the ways. Nigel Warrior.
Okay, no. Who do you
Dakota Shepley?
Who do you do on the offensive line? Yeah. Or sorry, the defensive line, because you've already got you've got so many defensive linemen that we've already talked about impacting.
I mean, if I had a chance to get Geno Atkins, I guess I would probably cut Brian Monet. I know that he's more of a run stuffer guy, but we seem to be set up to be fairly decent run stopping team. So maybe Brian Monet is a guy that they'd cut and hope to clear waivers and back on the practice squad so they can kind of have
he won't clear waivers.
Yeah, but defensive tackles like Brian Monet,
his impact,
not really a premium in the NFL.
His impact over the last couple of years, someone will pick him up because he costs nothing, and he's got talent, and he can impact the game.
Right now, I'm seeing the roster as being fairly lopsided anyway, with 27 on offense and 23 on defense. I think you may end up cutting somebody on the offensive side of the ball in order to make room for a guy like Geno Atkins.
Let's see, if you're going to do that, to me, you cut Travis Homer as the first guy.
Yes,
that you
absolutely.
And he's the guy who disappears.
Or Jake Luton, the third quarterback. I mean, there's a reason the third quarterback's on there, and he's on there to be able to cut to make room for Geno Atkins. That's
well, at some point they have to make room for another wide receiver because they've only got 4. And so they're going to
I think that would be Travis Homer. Swap Travis Homer out for a wide receiver or whatever.
So I think those
two
guys. But
you and I are on the same page. It's like you go get a guy like Geno Atkins. You go get a guy like Stephon Gilmore. Bring in Richard Sherman, who's not going to cost you a draft pick. It's only going to cost you some money. But the guy like Gilmore would give you more years, more opportunity, more team flexibility. It's going to cost you more upfront, but the team has already generated enough cap space to be able to make a move like that.
Yeah, with Sherman, it's a a 1-year deal. Come in, help us win, right now, and then you're gonna be a free agent again after the end of the year. But you're gonna get a chance to play and earn some money, so come do it.
And you're gonna get a chance to go to a Super Bowl again.
Yeah,
that's a big selling point. Okay. Cool. Great show. Good insight. Lots of lively discussion. I loved that, actually. It was a great show. You can find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. I'm at NW Seahawk. The show is at Hawks Playbook. Seahawksplaybook.com is a great resource for you online to be able to find all the shows, find the videos, find some articles, get fully immersed in all things Seahawks, and then find us on your favorite podcast app. Whether it's iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, all of them. We're on everything. And then YouTube. YouTube channel is a great resource. You get a lot of discussion and feedback going on the channel there. So I'd highly recommend that. If you maybe even just listen to the show on there, you don't necessarily have to watch it as well. So until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.